I came home from a 14-hour shift, rain still on my collar. My bedroom door was open when it should have been closed. The lamp was on when it should have been off. I pushed the door the rest of the way. She sat on my bed, one hand closed around something small. She looked up, and there was a stillness in her face I had not seen in 6 weeks. Her voice was thinner than a breath. She said, "I cannot hide this any longer." On the gray blanket between us lay a small brass medic pin, the number 12 nearly rubbed off. I knew that pin. I had given it away 5 years ago. My name is Marcus Ellison. I am 36 years old, a paramedic at a station on the east side of Portland, Oregon. I have been running an ambulance for 11 years now, and there is a specific kind of tired that comes with that number, a tired that shows up whenever the porch light turns on in the evening. The house I come home to belongs to my grandmother. She left it to me when she passed, a 2-story Craftsman on Belmont Street, oak front door, deep porch that had been slowly rotting when I got the keys. I have been rebuilding that porch one board at a time for 3 years, sanding in the rain because rain in Portland is just the weather. I was married once. Bianca and I split 3 years ago. She left first. There were no children. In those 3 years alone, I learned to live at a slow tempo. Saturday morning coffee at Ristretto down the hill. Sunday walks along the Willamette with nowhere I needed to be. Evenings spent sanding one length of railing, painting one board. I told myself that was healing. It might have just been a habit I called healing. To take the pressure off the last of the mortgage, I rented out the small room at the end of the hall. It used to be my grandmother's sewing room. I put a paper flyer on the community board at the coffee shop and did not post it online because I did not want the algorithm in my life. Naomi answered the flyer 6 weeks before that Friday. She came to see the room on a Tuesday afternoon. She introduced herself in about 4 sentences. She said she did bookkeeping, worked remote, had just ended something, and needed a quiet place. She carried one duffel bag and one small wooden box with a brass lock. I did not ask what was in the box. I have been in enough houses, in enough emergencies to know that everyone brings a box no one else is supposed to open, and mostly what is in there is old letters and older shame. She moved in the next weekend. What followed was a rhythm that surprised me. 2 coffee cups in the sink every morning instead of 1. Her laptop on the dining table, keys clicking quietly. I started bringing home an extra sandwich from the station without saying anything about it, just leaving it on the middle shelf of the fridge. By morning, that sandwich was always gone. Neither of us mentioned it. She asked me about my work exactly once, on the 2nd week. She said, "Are you ever afraid?" And I said, "The scariest part is the quiet between 2 sirens." She nodded and did not ask anything else. We never talked about specific calls, specific patients, specific nights. That was a line she did not cross. I thought she was being polite. I thought she just did not want to hear about death across the breakfast table. Both of those were true. Neither of them was the whole reason. The pin showed up on a Wednesday evening. I was digging in the hall closet for an old screwdriver and pulled out a shoebox I had not opened in years. Old patches, old identification cards, 3 brass medic pins from my early days on the job, all with the same number 12 stamped on the back. I picked one up, turned it between my thumb and finger, and put it back. I heard Naomi walk down the hallway behind me. Her steps slowed for just a beat as she passed. Then they continued. I did not turn around. I did not know yet that she had seen the box. That was week 3. Bianca's voice came through my phone in week 5, at 11 at night. A voicemail. Her tone had not changed in 3 years. She said, "Marcus, I need to see you. It is important." I did not call back, but the next morning I left my phone on the dining table, and Naomi saw the name on the screen when she poured her coffee. She asked quietly, without looking at me, "Who is that?" I said, "Someone I closed the door on a long time ago." She drank her coffee slower than usual that morning. I watched her hands around the cup and I did not ask why she suddenly needed both of them to hold it. I told myself I was listening carefully. I did not know yet that I was not. By the 7th week I had started remembering things about her I had not given myself permission to remember about anyone in a long time. She took her coffee without sugar. She could not fall asleep on nights when the rain came down hard on the tin gutters. The light in her room stayed on until at least 2 in the morning on those nights. A thin yellow bar under her door that I could see from the hall. I started leaving my own door open a crack when the weather turned rough. I did not know why I was doing that. I told myself the house breathed better with the doors ajar. One Sunday afternoon, I was sanding the trim around the bathroom door. She walked past me, saw the extra sanding block on the floor, sat down without a word, and sanded with me for 40 minutes. Neither of us spoke. When I finally thanked her, she said, "I like the sound of sandpaper. It makes me believe something is being repaired." Then she stood up, brushed the dust off her palms, and went back to her laptop at the dining table. I sat there a full minute after she left, holding the block, listening to my own breathing. Fine sawdust hung in the shaft of afternoon light coming through the window. I remember thinking that whatever she had said had been an answer to a question I had not asked out loud. Dale came by the house one Thursday off day. He is my partner on the ambulance, has been for 6 years. He drove out to my place to drop off a jacket I had left in the truck. He came up the porch, I let him in, and he stopped in the hallway when he saw Naomi at the sink filling a kettle. He nodded once, said hello, and I introduced them. 2 sentences, then he took his jacket, walked out with me to the driveway, and paused before he got into his truck. He said, "Lo, she looks like somebody, like from a long time ago." I laughed and told him Portland was a small city, and everybody looked like somebody. Dale did not laugh back. He held my eyes for a second, then said, "All right," and got in and drove off. I stood in the driveway watching his tail lights turn the corner. I told myself Dale saw too many faces every week. That was all. There was a book she left on the dining table one evening. Paperback, dog-eared, the kind you can tell has been carried around in bags for years. I picked it up to move it, and a folded newsprint clipping fell out onto the table. I opened it before I could stop myself. It was a short local news brief, dated September of 2021. 3 paragraphs about a multi-vehicle pileup on Interstate 84 east of Portland. I skimmed it. I did not recognize any of the names in it. I refolded it exactly along its original creases, put it back inside the same page, and set the book back down on the table. I did not think about it again that night. I have been on hundreds of calls. Not everyone I have pulled out of a car ends up in a name I remember. 2 nights later, I woke up at 2 in the morning and went to the kitchen for water. She was standing in the hallway at the corner where the wall turns toward my bedroom. One hand was closed by her side. She was looking, not walking, in the direction of my door. She heard me and turned, and her face did the thing faces do when they were just about to say something, and the moment breaks. She nodded, said goodnight, and went back to her room. In the morning I checked the shoebox in the closet. All 3 pins were still in it. I did not know why I had checked. I did not ask her about any of it. She started cooking dinner on Tuesday nights. Tuesday is my long shift. 16 hours on the truck if it turns bad. I would come home at 10, sometimes 11, and there would be a plate on the counter under a cloth, still warm because she had timed it to the minute of my usual walk from the driveway. She never sat with me while I ate the first time. By the 3rd Tuesday, she was sitting across the table, drinking tea, not looking at her phone. We ate in kitchen-like quiet, the fork and knife doing most of the talking. Then, without noticing I was doing it, I started leaving the station a half hour earlier on Tuesdays. I would tell Dale I needed to run an errand, and Dale would look at me with that face he has, the one that knows what I am doing before I do, and say, "Sure, boss, run your errand." I did not correct him. I did not have a way to correct him, because I did not have a name for what I was hurrying home to. I only knew that on Tuesdays the porch light seemed brighter and the walk from the driveway shorter than it had been in 3 years. There was a moment in the 9th week. I was washing varnish off my hands in the kitchen sink. She came in with a folded towel and offered it to me. Our fingers touched at the corner of the towel. Both of us went still for half a beat. Then she let go, and I dried my hands, and neither of us said anything about it. Then she said, in a voice as level as she could keep it, "Marcus, if one day I tell you a long story, will you listen to the end of it?" I said, "Listening to the end is my job." She smiled. That smile stayed with me all the way up the stairs that night. I lay in the dark with it running behind my eyes, and I thought, I am in trouble. Bianca's second voicemail arrived that same week, longer than the first, sweeter at the start. Then she got to the part about money. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to it all the way through with the phone on speaker, because I wanted to be done with it. Naomi was in the room next door. The wall between us is thin. She heard every word. From that night on, When she walked past my door on her way to bed, her steps slowed a little, and sometimes she stood there for a full minute before continuing on to her own room. I did not open the door. I did not know if I was supposed to. I did not know what she was standing there for. One night in the same week, she came to the kitchen after I had gone up to bed. She sat at the dining table. She reached into her pocket. She placed the small brass pin on the table in front of her and spun it once with her forefinger. Then again, slow. She sat there with it for maybe 20 minutes. Then she closed her hand around it and slipped it back into her pocket. She sat another minute in the dark kitchen. Then she went to her room. In the morning, I opened the shoebox in the closet for reasons I could not have explained if you asked me. All 3 of my pins were there. I did not know that a 4th one had been moving through my house at night. By then, I had started leaving my bedroom door cracked open every night, not just on rain nights. I told myself the house was better with the doors ajar. What I meant was that I had begun to believe 2 people lived here now, not 1 man and 1 tenant. I did not have a word for what she was to me yet, but I had a feeling for it, and the feeling was the kind you build a life around if you are brave enough to trust it, or stupid enough. I had not decided which of those I was. She whispered something to herself one of those 2 in the morning nights, standing outside my door. I heard it through the crack. She said, "Tomorrow, tomorrow I will tell him." I lay still on the other side of the door and did not answer, because I was not supposed to have heard, and because I did not yet know what I would say back if she ever did. Bianca showed up on the porch Saturday morning of week 10 without warning. I was drinking coffee on the top step, my hands still spotted with the previous evening's paint. It was one of those Portland mornings that could not decide between fog and drizzle, and my street was quiet in the way small streets are quiet before people start their errands. She got out of her car like the last 3 years had not happened. Her voice was already too loud for the sidewalk. She said, "Marcus, I only need 10 minutes. It is about money." I stood up and moved down 1 step, so I was between her and the front door. I did not invite her in. Naomi was in the kitchen. I could hear water running in the sink. I knew she could hear us. Bianca looked past me. She saw the movement in the kitchen window. I watched her mouth close for a second longer than it needed to, and then I watched her smile, the smile she always used when she started calculating. She said, "Give me 1 evening, and I will be out of your life forever. I promise." I told her no. She turned and walked back to her car, but her eyes left my face after they left the house. Not before. She was memorizing something. I knew it in the way I know when a scene is not over. 2 days of silence. I knew that silence. I had lived with her for 7 years. Bianca does not go quiet unless she is loading. Monday. End of my shift. I came out of the station into a lot half-lit by the sodium lamps that had just kicked on. She was leaning against my truck with a manila clip in her hand. She stepped forward before I could reach the door. She said, "Marcus, do you know who that girl is?" I did not answer. She pulled the papers out of the clip and held them up in the wash of orange light. A printout of a public social media page in the name of Naomi Prescott, a tagged photo of an older sister named Rachel Prescott, a printed article from the Oregonian, dated September of 2021, headlined about the multi-vehicle pileup on Interstate 84 east of Troutdale, and in the second paragraph of that article, listed among the responding units, a number I have worn on my chest for 11 years. Unit 12, my unit. Bianca pressed her finger against the pin on my uniform, the same number 12, and she said, "You saved her sister. She tracked you down. She moved into your house, and you are telling me nothing about this is strange to you." She lifted her chin the way she used to when she thought she had won a fight. She said, "She is using you. She wants something. You are just her hero project." I took the papers out of her hand. I did not argue. I did not thank her. I got in the truck. I drove home. The drive was 22 minutes. I have taken that drive maybe 2,000 times. That night I did not remember any of it. I was running every sentence Naomi had ever said to me through my head, looking for the lie. I could not find one I could put my finger on. She had never told me who her sister was. She had never told me about the crash. She had never told me she had come looking. But she had also never told me she had not. The absence of a story is a strange thing to weigh against a person. I did not know if what I was feeling was betrayal or just the shape of a truth I had not asked for. I parked. I went in. She was in the kitchen. She turned when the door closed behind me, and I saw it right there in her face. She knew. Not because anyone had called her, because she had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and she recognized my walk. I set the papers down on the dining table between us. Neither of us spoke for a full minute. She looked down at them, and her chin dropped, and she nodded once, very slow. I said, "Are you Naomi Prescott, sister of Rachel Prescott, from the crash on Interstate 84 in September of 2021? She said, "Yes," I said. "Is that why you rented this room?" She said, "At the beginning, yes, but..." The doorbell rang. Bianca had not gone home. She had followed me from the station. She stood on the porch in the yellow light of the fixture I had rewired myself last spring, and she pressed the bell a second time before I got the door open. She wanted a scene. She always wants a scene. She started before I had my hand off the knob. She called Naomi a grateful groupie, loud enough for the neighbors on both sides to hear. She called me a hero project. She said things I do not want to repeat. All of them chosen to make a clean thing look dirty. All of them dressed up as concern. She said Naomi was using me to steal a house, a life, a name. She used the word manipulator. She used the word predator. She used the word pathetic, and she said it toward the hallway where she knew Naomi was standing. Naomi did not defend herself. She stood beside me at the doorframe with her hands at her sides. She did not raise her voice. She did not step forward. She did not step back, and in that stillness, I recognized something that took me the whole 7 years of my marriage to finally understand. Bianca has always needed volume. Naomi has never needed any at all. The difference was not personality. It was character. One of them talked because she was afraid of silence. The other stayed silent because she was not afraid of anything except lying. I told Bianca to leave. My voice was low, not loud. She knew that voice. In 7 years, she had learned that when my volume dropped, the decision had already been made. She stared at me for a beat, and then she stared at Naomi for a longer beat, and then she went back to her car and drove off with her window down and something ugly on her tongue that thankfully the wind took away before it reached the porch. I watched the taillights disappear at the end of the block. The neighbor across the street pulled his blinds closed. Somewhere down the hill a dog barked once and stopped. The street was ours again, and it did not feel like a victory. I closed the door. The wood was still humming from the slam. Naomi and I stood in the hallway with the walls still holding the sound. I did not move. She did not move. She said, "I need to show you something, but I want to be in your room when I say it, because I have been practicing saying it in there for 6 weeks. I looked at her. She looked at me. There was nothing manipulative in her face, nothing rehearsed except the words. She had rehearsed the words because she wanted them to be right, not because she wanted them to work. I said, "All right." She turned toward the stairs. I followed her. My hand touched the banister my grandmother had touched every day of her life. The staircase creaked on the 3rd step the way it had always creaked. Everything in the house was still exactly what it had been an hour ago, and nothing was. We went into my bedroom. The lamp was still on from earlier, and the gray blanket had that soft indentation people leave when they have been sitting in one place for a long time thinking. She sat down on the edge of the bed, one leg tucked under the other, and I recognized the shape of the moment then. It was the same shape as the earlier evening when I had first opened the door and seen her there, except now I understood what I was looking at. I closed the bedroom door behind us. The rain had come back, and it was tapping the window in the slow, steady rhythm of a Portland late-night storm. She opened her palm. The small brass pin sat there, edges worn smooth, the 12 almost gone. She placed it down on the blanket between us. She did not look at me right away. She looked at the pin, the way you look at a thing you have been carrying for a long time when you finally set it down. She started slow. She said, "My sister Rachel was 6 months pregnant when she was trapped in her car on Interstate 84 in September of 2021. You were the one who cut her out. Before you handed her to the hospital, you put this pin in her hand, and you told her, 'Keep this until you do not need it anymore.' She kept it for 3 years. Then 2 Christmases ago, she gave it to me." She paused. She drew in a breath. She kept going. She said, "I did not know how to start my life over at that point. I carried this pin in my pocket to work every day for 8 months. I was not looking for you so you would know I was grateful. I was looking so I would know the face of the man who had saved my sister. Then I saw your flyer on the corkboard at the coffee shop. I told myself I would just come look at the room, then leave," she said. "But I stayed, because the first week you cooked too much pasta and left half of it out, and did not ask if I was hungry. Because the second week you left your door open when I could not sleep. Because the third week you started bringing home a second sandwich and never once mentioned it. And somewhere in there I realized I did not want to thank you anymore. I wanted to know you, and then I did not want to leave you," she said. "Every day I meant to say it. Then I was afraid you would think I was here out of debt. I am not here out of debt. I am here for you," she said. "I am sorry for arriving with one reason and staying for another, and not being brave enough to name the difference out loud. If you want me to leave tonight, I will leave." I sat down on the edge of the bed across from her. I picked up the pin. I turned it between my thumb and my finger. The brass was still warm from her palm. I said, "I told your sister to keep it until she did not need it. I never said only she could hand it back to me." I let a silence sit. Then I said, "I lived 7 years with someone who needed to be louder than me to feel real. I lived 3 years alone because I did not want to hear that kind of noise again. For 6 weeks I have lived in this house with someone who did not need any volume at all for me to know she was here. I am not angry. I am just trying to understand why the right thing arrived by such a long road, and why I did not see it earlier when it was pouring coffee across the table from me every morning." I looked at the pin on the blanket. I said, "You did not lie. You just did not tell me the parts I never ask about. There is a difference. I would rather find out this way than never find out at all." She was crying, but she was not making any sound. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I held the pin out to her. I said, "Hold it for me." For now, she took it. She closed her fingers around it like she was afraid the room might change temperature if she opened them. I had to make a decision that night, and I made the harder one. I decided not to send her out into the dark. I also decided not to pull her closer than either of us was ready for. I needed room enough for both of us, not to confuse gratitude with love. She had earned honesty. So had I. I said, "You stay, but we start again from the beginning. No sister, no crash, no Bianca, no pin, no story that came before this moment. Just me and you, in this house, starting tomorrow." She nodded. She did not try to add anything. She stood up carefully, the way people stand when they are worried a floor might give under them. At the doorframe she stopped, turned back to me, and said, "Thank you for listening to the end." I said, "I promised I would." She went to her room. She did not close the door all the way, neither did I. I lay on my back and listened to the rain start up harder outside the window. Somewhere around 3 in the morning it occurred to me that the pin had spent 5 years finding its way back to my hand. 3 sets of hands, its own route home. I closed my eyes and listened to her breathing on the other side of the wall. She was asleep. I thought, tomorrow we start. The next morning I made 2 cups of coffee. I set them both on the dining table. The pin was on the table beside her cup. She came out of the hallway, saw the arrangement, smiled for a single second, and did not say anything about it. We drank in silence. It was not different from any other morning we had shared under this roof, except that from now on nothing was hidden between us. That week we finished the bathroom doorframe. She held the cloth. I held the brush. Our hands touched when we passed materials back and forth, and neither of us pulled away this time. It was not a dramatic thing. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was the way a door hinge stops squeaking after you finally oil it, and you only notice a week later that a small noise you had lived with for years is gone. Rachel called on a Thursday evening. It was the first time I had heard her voice since the shoulder of that highway 5 years ago. She said, "So you are the paramedic." Her voice was shaking a little, but she was steady enough to get the sentence out. She said, "I have wanted to thank someone for 5 years. Nobody would stand still long enough for me to say it." I laughed, and my throat felt tight, and I said, "I am standing still right now." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." I said, "You are welcome." 4 months went by. It was early March. Rachel and her daughter came over for a Sunday afternoon. Ellie had just turned 5. It was the first time I had ever seen her. She came up the porch steps holding a stuffed cloth rabbit under one arm. She sat down next to me on the top step of the porch I had finally finished sanding. She held the rabbit out to me and said, "Mister, hold this while I eat my cookie." So I held the rabbit. She ate her cookie. She did not ask me anything about her mother, about the highway, about the pin, about any of it. She just sat next to me, close enough that I could smell the sunlight on her. When she finished her cookie, she took the rabbit back, thanked me, and went to find her mother in the kitchen. Rachel had been watching from the doorframe the whole time. She did not say anything either. She put her hand on Naomi's shoulder for 1 second on her way inside. That was all. Nobody needed to make a speech. The house held it. Later, when they were leaving, Rachel stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at me. She said, "Thank you for standing still." I understood she meant it about the highway, and about the house, and about her sister, all in the same sentence. 8 months after that November night, in July of the following year, I helped Naomi set up a proper desk in the corner of the living room. She had moved out of the rental room in the spring. No announcement, just a quiet migration of her books to the shelf beside my window. I hauled a storage box out of the hall closet, and as I set it down, a single sheet of paper slid out of a folder onto the floor. I picked it up. It was a State of Oregon Certified Public Accountant Certificate. Naomi Prescott. Current. Valid. I did not ask. She was in the kitchen boiling water for tea. I did not want the question to arrive before the trust did, so I set the certificate face up on top of the file stack, where she would see it when she came back in. That evening at dinner, she looked at me across the table and said, "When did you find out?" I said, "This afternoon." "Do you want to tell me?" She smiled for the first time with her whole face, not just her mouth, and she said, "I used to work for a big firm in Seattle. I left because I wanted to count money for people who were real to me. I was not hiding it. I just was not asked." I nodded. I did not press her for more. Later that same night, I told her about my 11 years on the truck, about Unit 12, about the specific evening in my early 20s when I decided this was what I was going to do with my life. She listened all the way through. She did not interrupt. Bianca sent a letter that August. It came in a plain white envelope with her handwriting on the front. I recognized the shape of the C in her signature before I even looked at the return address. The letter asked for money, and it dressed the ask up in complicated sentences about how hard things had been for her. I did not open it past the first page. I set it on the pile of bills. I never answered. That was the last time I heard from her. Some doors you close by not opening them again. Late October. Autumn had finally come to Portland the way it comes there, cold at the edges, red at the tips of the maples on Belmont Street. The porch was done, every board painted, every corner sealed. It had taken me 3 years, and it looked like it had waited for me. We sat on it that evening with 2 cups of coffee, and the pin sat inside the house on the mantel above the fireplace, not hidden and not on display. Just there, the way a photograph of someone you loved sits on a shelf without needing a caption. The wind moved through the maples and shook a handful of leaves loose. One landed on the step at her feet. She picked it up, turned it in her hand the way she used to turn the pin. I asked her a small question. There was no kneeling. There was no ring in a small box. There was no music. There was just the voice I have used for 11 years on the truck. The voice I used to tell people they are going to be all right. She said yes. It was the smallest yes I have ever heard. I was the only person close enough to hear it. That was exactly right. We did not tell anyone for a week. Rachel guessed on the phone anyway, from the way Naomi laughed at a small joke about nothing, and she called me the next morning and said, "All right, brother-in-law, when?" I told her, "When the maples finish falling." She said, "That sounds right for you two." I watched the last red leaves come down onto the porch railing over the next few weeks. Some evenings Naomi sat beside me on the top step and neither of us spoke. And I understood what my grandmother meant when she used to say a house has a heartbeat if you build it right. Looking back now, I understand that there are 2 kinds of truth that came into my life. The first kind arrived with volume. Bianca taught me that kind, and for a long time I thought volume was the only way a person spoke the truth. The second kind arrived by sitting quietly in my kitchen for 6 weeks, waiting for me to wake up enough to notice. I used to think a person had to come into your life for one reason, and one reason only: to be honest with you. Naomi came with 2 reasons. She hid neither of them. She only waited until I was steady enough to hold both at once. Some things you give away, you think you have lost them, It turns out they are only taking the long way around, choosing the right moment to come home. The brass pin with the number 12 sits on the mantel now. Not hidden, not on display. Everyone who walks into the living room sees it. Ellie asked me about it once. I told her, that is how your mother and your aunt found their way back to my house. Some doors you push open expecting the dark, and you find that your own home has light in it for the first time. If someone came into your life for one reason and stayed for another, would you be angry at the change? Or would you be grateful they stayed? Are you holding a pin of your own right now for someone you have not yet been brave enough to hand it back to? If this story reached you tonight, leave me a heart, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one, and tell me in the comments what you would have said to Naomi in that doorway. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.